Well, good morning. I hope that this Wednesday is a good day in your life. Um, we've been talking the last few days about storms, and both literal storms and figurative storms. And storms come in all kinds of shapes and forms. Here we'll have a snowstorm, we can have a windstorm. We've had firestorms, which are quite terrifying. We've had ice storms. So they all have one thing in common. They make your life pretty miserable, and they can often be extremely dangerous and threatening to your well-being. So it's normal that we should like to be someplace where storms are not, and to really be able to live our lives in a way that's kind of secure. I remember when I was 7 years old, we were driving to South Dakota to visit my grandparents and my mom's hometown, a little town called Tolstoy, South Dakota. And it was interesting as we were driving along, and I looked out the window, and there was a funnel cloud spinning. I mean, basically a hurricane a tornado was spinning outside the car, and it freaked me out. And my mom and my grandparents were just kind of nonplussed. I mean, they'd grown up around this, and they were able to look at it and saying, well, it's nothing to worry about. That's something that I think is kind of a life experience it gives to you, that if you live long enough, you see enough stuff that you begin to be able to put things into context. And one of the things I find is difficult for a lot of young people today is that instead of having that mature life experience from somebody who's older and been there already, they're almost solely dependent upon social media and the internet. It's interesting. A recent study was done and said that people who rely upon social media as their primary source of information are generally the most misinformed and uninformed people in the nation. That they said people who are well-informed, who can answer questions and identify what's going on more accurately, tend to get their information from a wide variety of sources. The one that I think is critically important is the scriptures, because the scriptures give you kind of the grid or the means of basically interpreting the things that you see going on in the world and even in terms of your own personal life. But we also find that storms featured real prominently in the gospel accounts. I mean, some of the great events, for example, when in Matthew 8, it says that Jesus told the disciples to sail across the lake. To us, that sounds like a simple enough thing to do, but the Sea of Galilee can be an extremely volatile and dangerous lake. The way it's, the geography of the land is really, the topography is really lends itself to some pretty vicious, horrific storms, because you have high mountains on the east and the west, and then you have openings on the south and the north, and they create kind of a tunnel. And a lot of times the cold air that comes from the north, from the way up in the Golan Heights, and believe me, it can be extremely cold up there, sometimes runs into the warm air coming up from the desert from the south, and those two things collide, and suddenly you can have great tempests. I've been on the Sea of Galilee a couple of times. One time in particular, I mean, there were waves that were probably 10 foot high, and we made for shore as quickly as possible, because it's quite possible that the boat we are on could be overwhelmed by the waves and sunk, and probably the rest of us with it. So, when the disciples are told by Jesus, go to the other side of the lake, there's something in that we wouldn't appreciate, but we realize that usually they would kind of skirt along the coast, so if anything came along, they could get off the water and onto shore quickly. But to go across the lake to where he was sending them, they had to literally kind of go out into the middle of the lake to get there. And they knew the possibility if the storm came up or if the wind changed, they would be caught out there and would have very little chance of survival, which, by the way, is exactly what happened. Now, I think it's so important is that, in Matthew 8:18, where Jesus tells the story, he begins by saying to them, follow me. And so even though their instincts would have said, this is not a good idea, they're trying to follow Jesus. They're trying to be faithful to him. And I know that every one of us have had those experiences where we decide, I'm just going to really commit myself to following the Lord and doing what he wants. And no sooner do you launch out into this new direction in your life that you suddenly find yourself overwhelmed by circumstances. I mean, it can be somebody saying, I'm going to begin to tithe to the Lord. And the next thing you know, you have some financial thing happening to you that threatens your well-being. And you're saying, do I hold on to this, or do I give it to God? And what if I don't have enough cover? That's a storm. That's an emotional storm that we go through. That's very, very frightening. And here we are saying, Lord, I chose to follow you, and now look what's happening. It can be all those kinds of things where you decide to serve in a particular area, and suddenly your schedule at work gets really busy, and you think, well, how can I do both things? And the first instinct is, well, I'll just drop the commitment I made to serve, and I'll take care of things at home. If that's what God wants you to do, it'll become really, very clear. But I find that God does sometimes, he does things like that because he wants to instruct us on how that he can enlarge our capacity. And we find that area of service becomes really a source of such joy and encouragement that rather being something that additionally drains our energy, we find ourselves energized. And the serving of the Lord is one of those things that brings energy into us. It builds us up. It stimulates us. And so I find that here these disciples, they made this decision to follow the Lord. And next thing they know, they're in great trouble. It says there arose a great storm. And it was a life-threatening storm. And, Peter, they're bailing as fast as they can, trying to keep the water out. And if you've ever been in a sinking boat, you realize that sometimes that's an impossible race to win. And the water has the ability to come in so much faster than you can get it out. And Peter wakes up Jesus, who now is taking a nap. He's not concerned at all. Shakes Jesus and said, Lord, Master, don't you care that we perish? Which is kind of like, God, don't you care that I'm dying here? And it's kind of obviously a faithless thing to say that he was not caring. But Jesus just simply got up. He looked at the wind and the waves. He said, peace, be still. The storm went away. The wind silenced. The waves went flat. And then he went back to bed. But before he did, he said one thing, oh, you've little faith. Oh, you've little faith. And I found myself in that place a lot. In fact, Jesus only said twice in the New Testament that somebody had great faith, and neither one of those were Jews. The Syrophoenician woman and the Roman centurion, and they were the only ones he said, I've never seen such great faith in all of Israel. And now he's saying to them, do you have so little faith? In other words, here you are, you're professing to be people of God as Jews, and you have faith in God, and you're following me. And I'm not saying you don't have any faith, but your faith has a lot of growing to do. And the way that it grows is by passing through the storms of life. So if you're in a storm right now, I don't want to be insensitive, and I know it's scary. It could be a very, very difficult and painful thing, especially if it's a relational storm where you're at odds with someone. But don't be of little faith. Make the decision that I'm going to choose to put my faith in the Lord and say, God, I believe that you're going to get me from here to the other side safely. Well, God bless you. It's been fun. We'll continue on tomorrow.